So we are officially live, Tau Time stream number 4, I believe. So we've talked about the EVM, we've talked about agents, we talked about Tau tailwinds. This is our 4th one, talking about DeepSeek, open source SOTA models. Really interesting conversation. I love hopping on to these, I guess, viral topics in real time, and excited to have this conversation with 3 people who are very close to open source model development, integrating DeepSeek within their subnets and in their products and services, and people who are directly hands-on with this stuff. So would love to, bounce it around to, I guess we could start with Caro. Introduce yourself. What do you think about all of this? Or I guess we can talk about what you think about all this after we do the introductions. But yeah, we'd just love to give everybody the opportunity to introduce themselves.
Howdy, howdy. My name is Robert. I go by the online handle Caro. I here the founder of Manifold. We run Subnet 4 on Bittensor. We do large language model inference. The thing that we really try to do is get a lot of speed. So John's actually a miner of Subnet 4. He's very good. So I'm sure we could talk all day about that. And yeah, DeepSeek is based. It's also, I think I was telling you about this a little bit earlier today, but with DeepSeek, I think that the market reaction to it is not because they trained it for $6 million. I think the market reaction is because it's very likely that they violated export controls, which means the United States government's going to crack down on NVIDIA, which means they sell less chips, which means their revenues are going to go down. But I think DeepSeek is still based and awesome. So yeah.
Awesome. Great intro. Very exciting. Bringing a lot of energy to the conversation. I love it. Crux, would love to allow you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Brody. So my name's Stefan. I've been in Bittensor for almost 2 years, believe it or not, which is nothing compared to Caro, but it's still something compared to most. I guess I found my way into Bittensor February 2023. I worked at the foundation for a while. I worked on Subnet 1, which was the sort of the OG subnet, largely dedicated to understanding how to do LLM inference in sort of this incentivized way. Latterly, I co-founded Macrocosmos with my co-founder, Will. I'm the CTO at Macrocosmos. We have 5 subnets, which broadly span sort of what I call all of the steps in the AI pipeline, from collecting data to pre-training large language models, using that data, fine-tuning those models, and ultimately, of course, inferencing those models and producing agentic workflows that leverage the models. So I guess our goal in Macrocosmos is to demonstrate that Bittensor cannot do one, but sort of all of the AI pipeline. And I think that's a really unique strength to the protocol. So I'll leave it there, Brody.
Incredible. And John, Rob gave you a little bit of an intro. Top miner on Subnet 4, also very involved with shoots. You guys have been pushing out a lot of updates on the shoots side. We'll love to pass it over to you.
I think he's actually looking at his Grafana dashboard right now.
Yeah, I don't ever stop. Now, so I go by the online handle John Durbin, so I know it's very shocking. I don't do the anon thing, but no, I work on shoots. I've been mining on Bittensor and various subnets for, I don't know, probably since maybe March of last year. So Subnet 4 is awesome. Shout out. The supercharging subnet. What we're doing over at Shoots. So I work on Shoots. I do the back end. Namoray and Bon Oliver do all the front end, Glider app and the Shoots.ai website, things like that. But I work on the back end. Yeah, and we're just a new type of compute subnet. We can do any sort of code. Anything you can put in a Docker image, we can run on Shoots. So it's not purely inference. We do inference, but the idea would be just general compute we could do on Shoots, and then if you want something completely turbocharged, you take it over to Subnet 4.
Incredible. So for the audience that's in attendance, obviously we've got some gigabrains on the call today. So we'll try to tailor this conversation at a more higher level and more, I guess, fundamental impact level on what it means for Bittensor, what it means for open source AI, and kind of what you can look forward to in regards to open source SOTA model development and Bittensor as a natural consequence of that's downstream of this open source model development. So would love to kind of just explore DeepSeek and give the audience more of a background into what DeepSeek is for people who have been catching it, through the tweet threads at this moment of time, not quite understanding the impact, who have maybe used it a little bit. But what does this actually indicate? What is the signal? What is the highest signal bullet point that we derive from this open source model? I don't know who would like to take that one at a very high level.
We can take a pass at that. I think that for me, the most important takeaway here is that open source is finally state of the art. It's been threatening to become state of the art for a couple of years, although it's typically lagged behind from 6 to 12 months. You know, a lot of people have been waiting with bated breath. We almost got there with Llama 3.3. I'm using we very liberally here. I'm not affiliated with Meta. But those guys were able to churn out an amazing model that was open weights. And, you know, let's not forget, a couple of years ago, even at the beginning of Subnet 1, we were using a bunch of 14Bs that were barely able to string together a coherent sentence, to be honest. And we were really, you know, we were stoked to be able to build all kinds of systems with those things. But for us, it was always very clear that when the open source models become highly competitive with closed source, then that's when Bittensor really starts to shine, because we can start bringing those tools in and doing the Bittensor thing with them, which is exploring different ways to use them optimally and refine them and improve them. So I think for me, I'll just say single bullet point. If I was only to say one thing on this call, open source is finally state of the art, guys. That's crazy.
Awesome.
No, it's very exciting. It's very exciting. It wasn't that long ago that like the best cards that you could get on the consumer side were like 2080 Ti's. This is like, I think like 12 gigabytes of VRAM, right? I don't know exactly how much VRAM is required for like FP16 for R1, but I think it's like, it's either like 600 gigabytes of VRAM or greater. It might be 2x that as well. But I think it's like, that's what it is required per machine. But the amount of VRAM, the amount of compute power required to be able to run these models today, because of decentralized networks like Bittensor, we're able to offer that to the world very quickly, which is really exciting. And whereas like only a few years ago, in order to be able to run a model like this, you'd have to have the original DGX, the 16 V100s, and that machine costs $300,000. It's very hard to get a hold of in the data center. So we're really able, not only is open source really meeting state of the art, but the ability to actually run those models and deliver them to people that actually be able to use is also like really come online over these last couple of years because of networks like Bittensor. And so it's really exciting to really have this kind of cathartic moment where it's like, yeah, we finally kind of like, we're really able to go toe to toe with the OpenAI and Microsoft and Facebook. And so, yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, it's definitely an amazing model. But one of the things I think, regardless of the model that we're talking about, that people like is just the ability to control the model itself, like to host it and know exactly what you're getting in and out. So I've done a lot of work with fine-tuning models and doing sort of model distillation with Ouroboros. And when I was working on that project, you would see like a sharp decline actually in the quality of outputs over time, because ChatGPT, any company, two things happen. One, you get the human, reinforcement learning going on. So censoring outputs of different kinds or adjusting it in other ways. And then you also just get optimizations. Maybe they quantize it from 16-bit to 8-bit and then maybe further down to 4-bit. And they say, 3% quality drop is no big deal. Let's just keep on rolling. It's one of those things where as a developer, if you're using one of these upstream models, like a frontier model from one of these closed source providers, your whole product may stop working overnight, really. I mean, because the outputs can change. And so the ability to have a model that's, even if it's not quite as good, or maybe it's better, I mean, the ability to know for certain what you're going to get in and out and just having it be reliable is going to be huge. And the fact that you can host it yourself and know it's not going to be tampered with is just massive.
I mean, even from a casual user perspective, and when I'm playing around with Claude or a GPT-4o, the outputs vary by the day, right? I've created this library of prompts that do exactly what I needed to do. And now I have to constantly adjust these prompts, and there's just so much degradation in the response. And there's no, announcements, or there's no reasoning why. It's just because they're fiddling with it in the back end. I'm kind of curious about this whole concept of what open source, like the factors that are going to continue to push these closed source companies into the open source realm, and what the perspective of OpenAI is, and the kind of like the pressures to go open source. I don't know if you guys have any insight into kind of that power dynamic or that game theoretic mechanism, because this was just an atom bomb on the American AI industry, so to speak, or the global AI industry.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it was an atom bomb, but
I know,
I'll let
because
you
you've
go
been
ahead
thinking
first,
about this.
though, Steph.
You've been thinking about this stuff, but I'm more thinking that this model was open source, right? Like that's paradigm shifting for most, in most cases. Or am I wrong to say that?
Well, it's been regarded as
No, I think that it being open source is big.
yeah. Sorry,
I'm not trying to step on your toes, Stefan. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a delay. So
Go ahead.
yeah, if I can maybe jump in. So I think that the perspective of OpenAI and these other proprietary labs has been mainly being like, we're going to keep our IP to ourselves. That's our moat, and as a result, we are going to reliably stay ahead and give you the extra 5% performance, which we can keep by guarding all of our systems, our infrastructure, our techniques, all of that fiercely. That has, that stood the test of time for about a year from the ChatGPT release, because they were able to consistently, either those guys or Anthropic, it was kind of a battle at the top for these different frontier labs. So I would say that legitimized at the time their play, which was you get 5%, more performance out of it by keeping it to yourself. But now that that's been severely undermined by this release, I think that for them, they need to pick their battle now. I think it has changed the game for them, because they can no longer play this card of, oh, we're doing it, in the back room, but we're the best. Well, you're not. And I think they have to answer to that now. What is their strategy going to be? I'm not sure. I mean, they've gone out on the record and said that O3 is going to be free. I'm sure the investors are fuming about that. That was probably their big revenue play for this entire year, was to basically milk the pro membership on O3. And this has basically been pulled from under their feet, because who wants to pay $200 a month or $2,000 a month for something that you can get for free, as per John's point? Strategically, for those guys, I would love to be a fly on the wall in those boardrooms right now, because I really don't know if they are going to start celebrating open source more. Now they realize that they're not going to have the moat that they thought they were going to have. They thought they'd have that 6 to 9 months, which was sort of everything to them, and it seems to have evaporated quicker than they could have expected. So that's my take on it.
Yeah. I really do kind of think that what's happening in the boardrooms right now has been going on for like the last 6 to 8 months, which is that how can you justify these CapEx like into creating these models, right? I mean, Crux runs subnet 9 on Bittensor, which is a competitive pre-training subnet, right? And the models that are being produced on subnet 9 are significantly cheaper than the models that are being produced by OpenAI with their, billion-dollar data centers, right? And so I think that what a lot of people are saying right now, especially when you have a Chinese company come in and offer it for free, is like, well, why are we spending so much money on this CapEx if, there are these Chinese companies or these other participants in the market that are offering it for free and open sourcing it? And one of the really cool things about DeepSeek is that it's not just open weight, it's also open source. So you can really reverse it, not necessarily reverse engineer, but like really re-implement the things that they've done. And so I think that like there's a two-pronged thing on DeepSeek in particular. It's on par with O1, which it has this new paradigm of like thinking tokens. If you think about this whole last like 2 months of like agentic AI, right? It's been very popular. I think that DeepSeek in O1, those type of thinking models are very good for that type of application. However, the amount of capital expenditure you have to do in order to actually train that model, as they've shown now, whether it's true or not that it only cost them $6 million. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Maybe that single training run cost $6 million, but definitely not the experimentation and the people required to, like, you have to employ those people. And so there's a lot more costs involved in that than just the $6 million in terms of the compute training run. But if OpenAI is spending $1 billion and Sam Altman's driving around in like a Koenigsegg and is like living a baller life, right? Like, is the CapEx really going towards all of this AI, or is there maybe a potentially an inefficient market here where there's been a monopoly created by OpenAI and like these very large tech giants to, move money from the data center to their pocket, right? I think that that's what the market reaction is showing. I think the models is very strong for agentic, but this is also not in itself AGI, in my opinion. So I think that we should still expect over the next few months to see even better results coming out of whether it's DeepSeek or Meta. Like, I bet Meta right now is freaking out because they've probably been trying to train their own version of O1 and they got beat to the punch here. And so, I think ultimately, like, it's going to be really interesting over the next 6 months to see how this plays out on the actual like capital expenditure side, because they are really utilizing, if what they're saying is true, they really are utilizing 100% of those GPUs. The H800 though is just the interconnect that's the issue. So yeah, for those reasons, like I wouldn't be like doomer on American AI, I guess is my ultimate point, or like Western AI or like Europe plus America, like type of situation. So
yeah, I wonder too though how much of the model's performance is really anything specific to their training data or their architecture or anything else. I mean, if you look at just the model size itself, if you look at Llama 13B versus Llama 70B, I mean, the intelligence gap is astronomical. And even, the largest one that's been open sourced by an American company is the Llama 405B, right? So Llama 405B is still almost 50% smaller than DeepSeek. I don't know that even if Llama or, Meta wanted to, they probably could release the Llama 800B in like a standard Llama architecture, not even being an MOE, and do some of this, inference time compute, which is the thinking tokens, stuff like that. So I wonder how much would really need to change to get another giant leap just on doing exactly what we've been doing, but doubling the size. And I think part of it is just the enablement that, the H200 chips and the new Blackwell chips and things like that. Because even to run like the DeepSeek model being as large as it is, even the original weights are FP8. So, if it was 16-bit, it would be 16 H200s to run that thing. You can run it on 8, or you can run it on 16 800s, over a fast interconnect and stuff like that. But I think the real breakthrough, hopefully, will be when this type of performance can be achieved on smaller sized models. And I think DeepSeek, even with like their distilled models, is showing that you can actually make huge improvements on much smaller models by just doing this test time compute and things of that sort. So yeah, I mean, DeepSeek was the first, but I imagine companies like Meta, if they wanted to, could very easily build another one that's, instead of 673 billion, it's 800 or 1,000 params or whatever. And so I don't think there's any like open source moat either. I think, the proprietary companies are worried because they're losing revenue share. And I mean, on Shoots, we've done almost 500 million tokens already in 24 hours on that model. So it's definitely, there's an appetite. If these bigger labs want to open source something, I think they would garner, especially OpenAI, they would get a lot of community support, and they could still run inference. I mean, why not? They're really good at doing that. They should just do that and make some money on it. But I think it would show that, the entire community goodwill. I think they're capable of it. I think they had that nice moat that they felt protected with, but they'll step up. I don't think anyone should panic really or anything like that. I think it's just a matter of time of realizing, that it's not going to work, this moat concept. And yeah, just get over it, start releasing stuff and just do better,
Competition is good for the market, like you just said. And I'm in your camp, Rob. American AI isn't dead. Of course, it's not.
We're just getting started.
Literally. Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like, what's the purpose of open sourcing the model for DeepSeek? Like, what's their plan and their strategy with that? Because if you had such an edge, right? Is that what it is? I mean, is it because they want to give it to the most amount of people as quickly as possible, and then it forces guys like Shoots and Targon to start, hosting that models for use of the most users as possible? Is that why? So that they can then load a short position on NVIDIA or on the market and then pocket because they're allegedly a quant fund. Is that the actual reason why?
I mean, they have like 15 billion AUM. Like, they're huge. So I would say that their primary business is that. Even with the crackdown and things like that happened in China like a year ago on quant funds, like, they would probably be able to get size on that trade very easily, right? Especially if they have 15 billion AUM, right? I also think that, like, I've thought about this, right? If I was having to go through export controls, right? How would I get around that? Because I don't live in America if I'm from China, right? So it's not like I'm super concerned about what the U.S. federal government's going to do to me, right? Because I live in China. And so how would I get those H100s or those H200s or those B1 to 200s, right? You would probably just go through Singapore, right? And then, so you would buy them through an entity in Singapore, and then you would just ship them to China. And I saw some videos of like a Chinese GPU distributor describing this exactly in detail. So if they really did it with H800s, that's really impressive, right? I mean, if it's true, then I could reproduce DeepSeek on the cluster I have here in Austin, right? I don't think I can reproduce DeepSeek on this cluster I have in Austin, even if I had all these amazing CUDA kernels that they are claiming to have, right? They're fully maximally extracting the juice from the GPUs, right? So I think that they're like, okay, well, we can't tell them that we violated export laws, so we'll just say that it's the H800, and then the market freaks out. They open a short position. They make, however large that bet size was, and then it's very smart for them to do this. And I figured that this is exactly what quants would be doing. So, yeah, I know it's overblown when my father texts me and he's like, "What's DeepSeek?" Like, so that's how I know. Okay, this is it entered the boomer sphere,
That's
Nothing
usually
needs to be
signal.
that. Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead,
that is kind of like it's definitely a possibility, but it is also extremely pessimistic. I mean, all the people on this call do open source work. That's all we do is open source stuff. So why do we do it? I mean, some people, there is a motive to just enhance the entire AI community by doing stuff open source. Meta does it. DeepSeek does it. Quen does it. There's a bunch of companies that are doing it. I don't know that it needs to be some sort of nefarious short position scheme. I mean, maybe they did, sure, but I don't necessarily want to like knee jerk think that that's actually what's happening, or even the export controls or anything else, because and I guess time will determine this. But Hugging Face, for example, is trying to reproduce a lot of the stuff in the paper. If they can reproduce even one epoch of that training run, then it's probably totally legit, and they just release it open source.
What do you think that they use the H800s? I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't use them, right? But it would be really surprising to me. Now, obviously, with your experience with Ouroboros, like I'm very familiar with your work even before your time at Bittensor, so I know that you're an expert on this. So do you think that they use the H800s, or I mean, because I personally don't. Like, just considering that the cluster that we have here is bigger than the cluster, the supposed cluster they're saying they used. And I don't think I could be able to train R1. Maybe it's just a skill issue. Like, it's probably that, but, or that's just all my thinking.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely possible. I don't see why not. Just look at the advancements in open source libraries that have happened in the past couple months. I mean, even look at like Flash Attention 3 versus Flash Attention 2 using the new Popper architecture, opcodes and stuff. I mean, you're getting like hundreds of percentage performance points boosts these things. And so if they spent the time to actually, optimize all these things at a very low level, I don't see why not. I mean, there's no like physical reason why it can't work if they have an optimized algorithm. I mean, a lot of the bottlenecks are just slow VRAM, between chip transfers and things like that. So if that's your 10x bottleneck and you solve 50% of it, you're still 5x faster, right? So there's no reason it's not technically possible for all of that to have happened. And, but I have no idea.
Yeah, it's just that the amount of flops I feel like is required in order to actually produce a close to 700 billion hyperparameter model is much larger than what 6 million could buy you. I mean, obviously, like, I think that ultimately it's good for open source that we have teams like DeepSeek that are open sourcing these models, right? And so, I don't necessarily think it's nefarious. It's just that, like, at the same time, like, you see, I feel like US equities in general are just heavily manipulated to, like, begin with. So, like, the repricing events and how all that works is, like, feels very corrupt to me. And so, like, let me give you an example, right? When we were in New York in August for, like, a Bittensor thing, right? And we get on the subway and there's a person coming home from work, right? And they have an email on their phone that's like, short idea, Dutch Bros. And then Dutch Bros earnings coming out tomorrow, right? So we're on the subway in New York. It's the first time I've ridden the subway. It's pretty cool, right? And the next day, the stock went down by 30%. Now, maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with how Dutch Bros works, right? Or maybe there's potentially market manipulation occurring here. And so if you're a quant fund doing $15 billion assets under management, I mean, that's much larger than a lot of, I'm not really sure, that's a huge fund, right? So, I just think that, like, the truth will come out ultimately. We'll see how it turns out. But I have my reservations, is just what I'm saying.
Stefan, what do you think
I'm
of all
not
this?
sure where I am on the Machiavellian plan. It's plausible to me to some degree. I can certainly, like, I can appreciate it. And there's some, factors of 10 or maybe 100 in the numbers that are quite surprising. But I mean, I think inefficiency during training and underutilization of hardware can probably account for some of it. Question is, does it take it over the finishing line? I think back to your question, Brody, about what do they get out of open sourcing it, other than a huge short on Wall Street. I think another option as well is it's been proven that open sourcing models is a great recruitment tool. It's a great way to build credibility for your brand. Mistral did this absolutely masterfully in Europe. They just became the darling of European AI because they became the place where everyone that wants to contribute to something humanitarian, and while also doing AI, that's where they ended up coming. And secondly, I think it's also what Meta have been doing for a few years. It's not just altruism that they're creating the Meta series of models. They want to define the standard so they can be the ones at the center of a community and they can basically build from that platform. So it's actually a 4D chess move because you build a community that speaks your common language of Meta and its particularities and all of that. And that downstream creates, everyone just sort of converges around you as the de facto, a set of models that everyone uses in their daily practice. And I think that there's plenty of ways that actually ends up becoming a massively profitable strategy too.
I think that makes a lot more sense. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I do think like when it comes to Meta, something else that's, like, been really good for just open source AI and like in general is Mark Zuckerberg becoming based. Like, I think that, like him, what you just, if you were to put, like, a timeline, right? Mark Zuckerberg starts wearing chains and open source AI, it's like the charts are, like, the same, So I think that what Facebook is, I think that if there's any American company that has the resources to pull it off, it's probably going to be Meta. I'm JEPA pilled, as I've described to y'all before. And so I think that is, like, the next huge breakthrough in AI. R1 follows a lot of the thinking that's in JEPA. And so I think it would be unsurprising that in 6 months, like, I think the autoregressive decoders are still going to be relevant, right? Because you need a decoder to actually get the output of the embedding. But I don't think that it will surprise me to see Meta immediately do, like, a tit for tat, right?
Yeah, and just anecdotally too, we've been working on the agent platform that runs on Shoots, and obviously R1 is great there. But if you actually switch from R1 to something like Claude or even GPT-4o, even some of the light ones at times, it actually kind of does better a lot of times using these proprietary models. I mean, certain things I saw in a report that some of the model weights are actually kind of, like, overfit a bit. And you can kind of see that coming out in the agent platform where, for example, if it ever tries to use a web search, if it's factual information, it always tries to use site:/nytimes.com. Even if you put it in the prompt 1,000 times, don't search that domain, it's still going to do it. So the model is overfit to a certain extent. And, maybe that's partly related to the shoestring budget, or maybe they just overfit it on specific benchmark data, or who knows, I don't know. But the point is, these other companies, I feel like, will have no problem matching that performance or beating it at some point. And DeepSeek, as amazing as it is, still in a lot of ways doesn't actually compete with some of these proprietary models. Just from my use case, there are a lot of problems that it does extremely well on, but we have no idea really if the data that they used came from one of these frontier models anyways, like using a tool like Ouroboros where they fine-tuned on the output of Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and they did 10 queries, and then they did like a ranking, and they picked the best one. And so now you're only, it's like the Phi models from Microsoft, right? They're only trained on synthetic data. So their performance is outrageously good, even with a fraction of the amount of data that went into it. We don't know the exact fine-tuning data that they used, so we can't say, but those are the kinds of things that we should be really careful of just saying that this is such an amazing model, because it does still kind of fail at a lot of stuff.
It's definitely not a silver bullet. So a report today, it's a sort of a benchmark which is related to delivering accurate news, and it ranked 10th out of 11 of the leading models, something like 17% accuracy. I wouldn't be surprised, John, if it was related to the fact that it always goes to New York Times, but it did dismally on that. And the other thing there as well, I like from talking to it and probing it in various ways, it has kind of an identity crisis in several ways, right? Whether it's language mixing or just sometimes it thinks that it's ChatGPT, which says a lot about its training data. Look, I don't want to bash it. I mean, it's an amazing model, but it's, guys, this is the current generation of leading AI is the stupidest AI we'll ever have. And in 3 months from now, these things were still Flint tools. There's a paranoid side of me which just like relentlessly hoards every frontier model that I can get my hands on, just in case they suddenly stop giving them out for free. It's like I'm like hard drive full of various models just in case I can't get them in future.
That's really funny. And that was my knee-jerk reaction when I first used ChatGPT for the first time. I was like, oh my gosh, this is too powerful. When are they going to turn it off? They might turn it off and I'll lose my edge, because there was like a 1 week window where you had a huge edge if you were doing stuff with GPT. And I was worried that it would be too powerful. But here we are, and things are only starting to get better. But I think that's a really great perspective too about the actual performance across various benchmarks or various modalities, I should say, and how this isn't a silver bullet and things will catch up. And given that's kind of the entire purpose of open sourcing, is that you're advancing the space by doing that, and you're not permanently on the pedestal. I'm kind of curious, like specifically for you, Steph, with you very much in awareness and in line with the actual full pipeline of AI development, what would be the process for creating something that was Bittensor native, that was state of the art in regards to these general reasoning models?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brody. I think that we're on the right track. You basically have to find a way to translate it into a gamification that can't be sort of subject to exploitation, would be the way that I'd put it. So in Subnet 9, we historically relied on just ridiculously large web scale data sets that you can't cram all of it into a small model. So you don't run the risk of anyone cheating by memorizing the exam, so to speak. And we found that took us so far. It worked in certain competitions, yet we were left wanting when it came to what the state-of-the-art models and frontier models were able to perform. What came next then was we had to figure out a way to do what's called dataset mixing. So you don't just train on this one monolithic dataset, but now you give it specialist datasets, whether it's some sprinkling of multilingual examples or you give it some math and coding. The point is, when you scrape the entire internet, those groups that are really important for general reasoning capabilities are underrepresented. So the models just don't learn to do them very well. So what we found was there's certain ways that we can introduce dataset mixing, which is certainly more of a modern technique. Everyone now that does big pre-training runs, they have, various phases. The first phase is just compress the internet. And the second phase is now start to refine all of these specific dedicated skill sets that translate really well to downstream use cases. And I think that what we're starting to talk about in Macrocosmos now is how do we do variants of reinforcement learning in our competitions as well, because that's proving itself to be an enduring part of the training process. And if you would have asked me a year ago, I would have said RLHF, how do we get humans in the loop? I'm not sure, but we'll have to figure it out. And then for half a year, it was RLAIF. So now the AI does the sort of the feedback step. And now we're just RL. So the acronym's just getting shorter now, which is really cool, because I think RL is actually the easiest of the three.
There's a loss curve on the acronym itself. I love that.
Acronym length minimization. Yeah. So I think what we're looking at right now is how do we find a way to have, again, it would need to be a large enough data set that it's not susceptible to like lookup attacks. The miners can't just memorize things. But if we, for example, synthetic data would be a really interesting way of doing this, which is kind of what DeepSeek did in their R1 paper. And then the difference is now we have this sort of unending competition where miners are improving and improving through a reinforcement learning approach. So that would be super interesting. And I think that we are, the papers that come with these groundbreaking models gives us new ways to think about how we could incentivize them. I would like us to get to a future state where we create algorithms for training that are just impossible outside of Bittensor's incentivization. But right now, I think we're getting much better at reproducing all of these leading methodologies within Bittensor, but with this sort of gamification switch that we turn on. And it's not easy, but the results do really start to speak for themselves after a while.
It's amazing. That's a good articulation. And it's cool that there's a lot of these new techniques that are revealed within each iteration of the paper that is dropped, and then you can integrate that directly within your own subnets, incentive mechanisms, and your own processes and methodologies. And that is obviously the beauty of open source. So I'd love to kind of hit this conversation home with the value accrual of tau, or the value accrual to tau through broader open source initiatives that are led by external labs that are producing stuff like DeepSeek. Where do you see the value accruing to tau in this overarching initiative or broader movement of open source AI? And that's very ambiguous. It's very nebulous for a reason, because I think you can take it a whole bunch of different ways. John, I'd love to kick this one to you to begin with.
Yeah, I think, one of the things we saw, and again, I mean, it kind of goes back to whether you think the company is being nefarious or not, but DeepSeek had to close off their API to new registrations to only people that had that particular area code. And, the story is they just had too much traffic, which I completely believe, because we had the same issue on Shoots. The second we opened it up, it was just slammed with requests. I'm still, today tweaking the different rate limiting techniques to make sure that the miners don't get overwhelmed and things like that. So I think the beauty of something like DeepSeek is, and Llama and any other model, but especially right now with all this interest, is that it shows why something like a completely decentralized platform is important, because who's going to shut off registrations to your area code on Bittensor? It's not possible. You don't need a phone number. You don't need an email. You don't need anything. It's completely permissionless. And anyone can join. Anyone can add hardware. You don't need anything to use it. I mean, you just register and you use it. You're good. You call the API. So, I think that's a huge value add. And again, DeepSeek is the current one, but in a month, it'll be something else. Maybe Quen 2.5 Max comes out. Maybe, there's a new Llama, whatever. And that's where something like Bittensor is always going to sort of persist and be useful in that scenario, because, if the company releases it publicly at all on Hugging Face or wherever, we're going to grab it. And then even if they wanted to change the license or something after the fact, we've got it now. We're going to run it. Anyone can run it. It's permissionless, and it's out there. And then, the more tools we can build on top of it, LLMs are going to be sort of like the brain for the agentic system, right? They have to decide which functions to call and everything else. So there's an infinite number of use cases for different subnets for doing different things. A model is trained on subnet 9 and automatically goes over to Shoots or to Targon. We call an image model on subnet 23, whatever the case may be. Just sort of getting that centralized control and permissioning. Permissioning, I think, is a lot more of an issue than decentralization. It's giving access to everyone without, fiat restrictions, without KYC, without any of this crap. It's just opening it up, making it permissionless. And, the more powerful stuff we can get on there, the less and less power these frontier companies will have to sort of gatekeep anyway, even if they wanted to. So I think it's huge for all AI crypto.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think there's a couple tweets that came from some of you guys where, DeepSeek is unavailable on their front end, but, we're serving requests nonstop, and we're servicing all of this demand through Shoots, through Targon, through Akash, through Venice, through all of these open source, decentralized, inference providers. They had no problem handling all those requests. So, all non-KYC, non-permissioned environments. And that is, definitely the a core value proposition for Bittensor and distributed networks in general. Rob, what do you think? How does the value accrue to Tau?
Well, I've thought a lot about this, and I've talked a lot about Coke and Pepsi when I use these analogies. And so I'm going to deploy them here. But I've been learning a lot about the beverage business lately. I have a lot of friends who are into beverages, and unfortunately, I'm not a part of the beverage discussions, but I'm beverage adjacent. And I've learned about how these beverage companies, like, have you ever heard of Olipop? Have you ever had Olipop? Have you heard of this before?
Yeah, they're bangers.
Ready?
Yeah, I've had them.
You like it, right? Well,
Yep.
So apparently they just got valued at $1 billion, right? Now, it's kind of hard to imagine how a drink could be worth $1 billion, right? If they're only making like 20, 30, $40 million at that time, right? But it's because the like oil barons of like the Gilded Age type of people, where it's like, I must crush my competition. I must completely, like the Rockefellers and these types of people, right? The businesses that those people participated in is very similar to how drinks are today. And I actually think it's very similar to how AI is going to turn out just in general, right? Like the entire AI market, right? So there's if you're Olipop, right, you're valued at $1 billion because they're assuming that you're going to sell Olipop to Coke or Pepsi. Olipop is not worth $1 billion unless it's a part of Coke and Pepsi's distribution system, right? The movie, like, if you can go anywhere in the world basically and get a Coke, right? And the reason why is because Coke is not actually in the business of making drinks, right? They're in the business of distributing things across the world, right? And AI is very similar because there's no difference really, besides maybe like the quality, like, oh, I like the little fizzles and the pops better on this one than the other, right? But if you look at someone like DeepSeek, the fact that they're closing it off to other people, they're only letting the Chinese use it, is a bad distribution move, right? And I think that will ultimately hurt China in the long term, right? Like the Great Firewall and these sorts of things, because whoever's going to win the most, like, it's kind of obvious who wins here. It's OpenAI, or who's winning currently. And the reason why is because OpenAI has 300 million monthly active users, right? They have the distribution. And so when you take this to its furthest extent, right? Like if you look at who is winning right now, it's not necessarily Facebook. It's not necessarily like Microsoft, I guess, is the ultimate winner here because they own everything. It's the way that the value accrues to Tau is by gaining distribution, right? And like in a very serious kind of way, not like in a small kind of way, like in a very serious kind of way, where you're able to distribute these products. Like DeepSeek is like Coke or Sprite or whatever, right? It doesn't really change if I'm running it locally or it's running in the cloud. And so it's all about how can you move the AI? How can you get the tokens from right here to right there? And whoever can do that in the most efficient way possible will win. And I think that Bittensor is able to do this, like to an order of magnitude better than what even OpenAI could do, right? Right now, they have that brand, Coke, so it's very similar in like the branding, but it wouldn't surprise me if Bittensor turns into Pepsi and you have OpenAI, which is Coke, and you have Bittensor, which is Pepsi, and the value of your model is dependent on whether or not it's being distributed via OpenAI/Microsoft or it's being distributed via Bittensor. And so that's how I see the value really accruing to Tau, is by winning the distribution game, right? And I would say that Bittensor today is not there, and it's not like what is Bittensor, like what are we focused on this year? What is John focused on this year? A lot of the subnets can be focused on this year is this core problem, which is distribution. And like, we're not even close to hitting OpenAI on its distribution yet, right? But I think that over the course of this year, we're going to start seeing us really start to take a dent in their distribution. If they're doing 300 million users a month, right? Like, even Open Router's not even close to that, right? So we really have to be focused on distribution. Like this is because everyone here on this call right now holds Tau, right? I hold Tau, Stefan holds Tau, John holds Tau, Brody holds Tau, right? And so how so ultimately, I wouldn't even try to say that it goes like subnet dependent, right? Because it's like ultimately one of these subnets is going to kill at distribution, or maybe multiple subnets kill at distribution, which accrues the value to Tau. So, but without that distribution, without having the Pepsi level, Olipop is not worth that much, right, on its own. And that's what I'm trying to say. Like right now, you're seeing Bittensor valued as if it's not a part of a Pepsi distribution system, right? And I think over the next year, my bet, like what I'm betting the future of my company on, is that we really solve that right there. We become Pepsi in terms of the distribution. So that's what I think.
Wow, that was a very good take. I really like that analogy too.
Super interesting.
Are you trying to compete the Baron? Go ahead, Seven.
I was going to say, I really want a Pepsi right now, and I don't even drink Pepsi. No, that was a super interesting take on that, Rob. And I agree with you both. I think that, John, you really nailed a lot of the points that I would have made. I guess broadly, guys, Bittensor is so well positioned to be a beneficiary of this whole AI arms race, for lack of a better term, because the more enhanced AI becomes, the more adoption we see, the more daily users we have, the more use cases we have, the more traffic we have, the more tokens we need. And that is just a funnel directly into Bittensor, because Bittensor can solve the distribution point, as per Karo's point. And I think that the nice thing here as well is we can offer this very liquid, competitive marketplace where we can also outprice, outperform, because we've kind of got this competitive part. There's no fat margins that are sort of non-negotiables. Everything is in some sense sort of liquid. So Bittensor is a very adaptable marketplace, and with more people that need access to more models because they're getting better and more embedded in our lives, I think that we will be shocked to the amount of infrastructure that we need, and things like DeepSeek going down because of demand, and OpenAI periodically going down because of surges in demand. That's only going to become more and more common, because right now we've only started to engage a small fraction of the entire target audience for something like this. We're going to be measuring it in billions of people. And I think my other point here as well is, as adoption grows and grows, the specifics of the border that you live within geographically is going to impact the intelligence that you have access to. And Bittensor also very elegantly sort of circumvents that. You have completely borderless access to state-of-the-art models, to state-of-the-art hardware, to state-of-the-art talent, and also data. So kind of like all of those prerequisites to do a lot of very, very high impact, to provide very high impact AI commodities is just natively very available to Bittensor. So I think that this is a really, really good thing for Tau holders, because our value only increases as AI gets more capable and there is more demand for AI. And I think one last point on that as well, and something that maybe ties it back to DeepSeek, is what is really hot right now is this whole test time compute, which means models spend longer thinking. They output more tokens than previous generations in order to get better results. This can be up to 1,000 or 10,000 times more tokens than they used to in some cases, or maybe 1,000. Now that means that you have much more inference demands than you ever have before. So subnet 1, subnet 4, also 56, all of these different subnets, they're all perfectly positioned to provide an on-demand service that is borderless to give you access to these tokens. I think over the course of a model's lifetime, they consume a lot more energy during inference than they do during training. And that's only going to increase further with test time compute. Probably adds a 0 or 2 to that, because now you use 30 million GPU hours to train the model, and then you can 10x that based on how much you need to run the model. And once again, we have access to an enormous reservoir of compute around the world because of incentives. So Tau holders should be very happy.
I think you guys eloquently just outlined a really interesting value proposition for Tau and for open source AI. And I'm sure that we could explore so many different topics that are adjacent to this, the focal point of conversation here, that is DeepSeek and Bittensor. But in the interest of time and respecting everybody's Friday, Stefan, I know it's getting late for you. You probably want to go and have a nice dinner. And I know I speak for me and Rob, who are getting hungry. It's a lot lunchtime for us. So thank you guys so much for hopping on. This was such an interesting conversation, and I'm really glad that I got you guys on, because this was just a great mixture of opinions across the different, subnets and different types of technical problems that you're all working on. but also just a very deep technical expertise. So it was a really great conversation dissecting all these nuances to DeepSeek and Bittensor. So thank you guys so much for hopping on. For everybody who listened, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the Tau Times newsletter. You can find us at tautimes.ai/subscribe for all the weekly news and events happening in the Bittensor ecosystem. The recap and the AI summary for this conversation will be in the newsletter this week. And with that, we'll be signing off. Thank you, guys.